Welcome to the therapy room. A place where psychology becomes understanding, and understanding becomes healing. I'm a psychologist passionate about bringing psychology closer to people in a way that feels human, emotional, cinematic, and deeply understandable. And today, we are talking about something most people spend their entire lives feeling, but rarely know how to explain. The feeling of being lost. Not physically lost. Existentially lost. The feeling that life is somehow more complicated than everyone promised it would be. The feeling that nobody gave you the instruction manual. The feeling that everyone else seems to understand something you somehow missed. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever looked around and wondered, why does everything feel so complicated? Why do relationships feel confusing? Why do people contradict themselves? Why do I contradict myself? Why can life change so dramatically from one moment to the next? Why does certainty disappear so quickly? If you've ever asked yourself those questions, leave a comment below. Because today we're going to explore one of the most fascinating ideas ever proposed by a thinker named Edgar Morin. And what he discovered may completely change the way you see your life. Edgar Morin believed that one of the greatest problems of modern society is surprisingly simple. We were taught many things. But we were never taught how life actually works. Think about it. In school, we learn mathematics, history, geography, science, languages. But how much time do we spend learning how uncertainty works? How much time do we spend learning how emotions influence decisions? How much time do we spend learning how fear changes perception? How much time do we spend learning how everything in life is connected? Very little. And according to Morin, that creates a problem. Because reality is not divided into separate subjects. Life is not organized into neat categories. Reality is complex. Everything affects everything. Your emotions affect your decisions. Your decisions affect your relationships. Your relationships affect your mental health. Your mental health affects your physical health. Your physical health affects your energy. Your energy affects your opportunities. And your opportunities affect your future. Everything is connected. Yet most people try to understand life by separating everything into pieces. And when reality refuses to fit neatly into those pieces, confusion begins. Perhaps that's why so many people feel overwhelmed today. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they are trying to navigate a complex world using tools designed for a simpler one. Morin spent much of his life warning us about something. The danger of oversimplification. Human beings love simple answers. Simple explanations. Simple villains. Simple heroes. Simple solutions. But life is rarely simple. People are not simple. Relationships are not simple. Societies are not simple. And neither are you. You are a collection of contradictions. A person capable of courage and fear. Confidence and insecurity. Kindness and anger. Wisdom and confusion. Strength and vulnerability. And perhaps one of the most liberating things Edgar Morin teaches us is this. You do not need to eliminate your contradictions to become whole. You need to understand them. Because complexity is not a flaw. Complexity is reality. And the moment we stop fighting reality, understanding begins. For many people, suffering begins because they expect life to be predictable. But life was never designed to be predictable. Life is movement. Life is uncertainty. Life is change. And perhaps the greatest illusion we are taught is the belief that certainty equals safety. Morin would argue something very different. He would argue that uncertainty is not the enemy. It is part of being alive. And the sooner we learn to coexist with uncertainty, the less afraid we become of the future. The future has always been uncertain. The difference is that modern life constantly reminds us of it. Every headline. Every notification. Every crisis. Every prediction. Every opinion. We are exposed to more information in a single day than previous generations encountered in months. And yet, despite all this information, many people feel more confused than ever. Why? Because information is not the same as wisdom. Knowing more facts does not automatically create understanding. And understanding was what Edgar Morin spent his life pursuing. Not knowledge. Understanding. The ability to see connections. The ability to see patterns. The ability to understand that reality is larger than any single explanation. And perhaps that's what makes his work so important today. Because we live in a world obsessed with certainty. Yet reality continues teaching us the same lesson. Life is more complex than we think. And perhaps that's exactly what nobody ever taught us. Perhaps the most dangerous thing about modern life is that we have never had access to so much information. And yet, so many people have never felt so confused. Think about that for a moment. We carry more information in our pockets than entire libraries contained just a few decades ago. At any moment, we can search for answers. Watch experts. Read opinions. Consume news. Learn skills. Explore ideas from every corner of the world. And yet, despite this explosion of knowledge, many people feel lost. Why? Edgar Morin believed the answer was surprisingly simple. Information is not understanding. Knowledge is not wisdom. And facts alone do not help us make sense of reality. Because reality is not a collection of isolated facts. Reality is a web of connections. And when we only focus on the pieces, we lose sight of the whole. Imagine trying to understand a forest by studying a single leaf. The leaf matters. But it doesn't tell the whole story. You must understand the branches. The roots. The soil. The weather. The animals. The ecosystem. Everything influences everything else. And according to Morin, human beings often make the mistake of treating life as though everything exists separately. We separate work from emotions. Emotions from health. Health from relationships. Relationships from society. Society from culture. Culture from technology. But reality doesn't work that way. Everything is connected. And when we fail to see those connections, confusion begins. Perhaps that is why so many people feel overwhelmed today. Not because life has become impossible, but because life has become too interconnected to be understood through simple explanations. A problem at work affects your mood. Your mood affects your relationships. Your relationships affect your confidence. Your confidence affects your decisions. Your decisions affect your future. One small event creates consequences far beyond itself. Yet we often search for a single cause. A single answer. A single explanation. And life rarely offers one. This becomes especially obvious when we look at social media. Social media promises connection. Yet many people feel more isolated than ever. Social media promises information. Yet many people feel more confused than ever. Social media promises certainty. Yet many people feel more anxious than ever. Why? Because the human mind was not designed to process thousands of opinions every single day. Every time you open your phone, you enter a world filled with competing realities. One person says success looks like wealth. Another says success looks like freedom. Another says success looks like simplicity. Another says success looks like influence. Who is right? Perhaps all of them. Perhaps none of them. This is exactly the kind of question Edgar Morin wanted people to ask. Because complexity forces us to move beyond simple answers. And simple answers are incredibly seductive. Human beings love certainty. We love clear explanations. We love black and white thinking. Good people. Bad people. Right. Wrong. Success. Failure. But reality is rarely that clean. People are complicated. Situations are complicated. Even our own minds are complicated. Have you ever done something you knew was a bad idea? Of course you have. Everyone has. Why? Because human beings are not perfectly logical. We are emotional, contradictory, complex. And understanding this changes the way we view ourselves. Many people suffer because they expect themselves to be perfectly consistent, perfectly rational, perfectly certain. But those expectations are impossible. Life does not demand perfection. It demands adaptation. And adaptation requires flexibility. One of Morin's most powerful ideas was that uncertainty is not a problem to solve. It is a condition of existence. Think about how much anxiety comes from trying to eliminate uncertainty. People want certainty about relationships, certainty about careers, certainty about health, certainty about the future. Yet certainty never fully arrives. The future remains unknown. And perhaps that is why so many people feel exhausted. Not because they are living life. Because they are fighting reality. Trying to force certainty into a world built upon change. Trying to control what cannot be controlled. Trying to predict what cannot be predicted. Morin believed wisdom begins when we stop demanding impossible guarantees from life. When we stop expecting complete certainty. When we stop expecting reality to behave according to our plans. Because reality has its own logic. Its own complexity. Its own movement. And perhaps maturity is learning to dance with that uncertainty rather than resisting it. This idea becomes even more important when we think about identity. Many people spend years trying to define themselves. Who am I? What is my purpose? What am I supposed to become? These questions matter. But sometimes they create pressure. Because people imagine identity as something fixed. Something permanent. Something they must discover once and forever. Morin saw things differently. He understood that human beings are constantly evolving. The person you were 10 years ago is not the person you are today. The person you are today will not be the person you become 10 years from now. Life is movement. Growth is movement. Identity is movement. And perhaps one reason people feel lost is because they are trying to find permanent answers inside an ever-changing reality. But maybe being lost is not always a sign that something is wrong. Maybe sometimes it is a sign that growth is happening. Maybe confusion is not always failure. Maybe confusion is the beginning of understanding. Because before we can see reality clearly, we often must let go of the illusion that it is simple. And that can be uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Because simplicity feels safe. Complexity feels uncertain. Yet complexity is where truth often lives. And Edgar Morin spent his life inviting us into that truth. Not to make life harder, but to help us understand it more deeply. To see beyond simplistic explanations. To recognize connections. To embrace uncertainty. To accept contradiction. And perhaps most importantly, to understand that being confused by life does not mean you are failing. It may simply mean you are finally beginning to see reality as it truly is. And perhaps that is exactly where Edgar Morin's greatest lesson begins. Not with certainty. Not with answers. But with humility. The humility to admit that reality is larger than our explanations. The humility to admit that life cannot be reduced to simple formulas. The humility to admit that we do not fully understand everything. And strangely enough, that realization can be incredibly freeing. Because so many people spend their lives carrying an invisible burden. The burden of believing they should have everything figured out. They believe they should know exactly where they're going. Exactly who they are. Exactly what they want. Exactly what the future holds. And when reality refuses to provide those answers, they assume something is wrong. Something is wrong with their life. Something is wrong with their choices. Something is wrong with them. But perhaps nothing is wrong at all. Perhaps they are simply experiencing what it means to be human. Because uncertainty is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of life. Think about the most meaningful moments of your existence. falling in love, starting a new chapter, taking a risk, changing careers, moving somewhere new, pursuing a dream. None of those moments came with guarantees. None of those moments came with certainty. Yet those are often the moments that shape us most deeply. And that is what makes Edgar Morin's message so powerful. He reminds us that life is not a puzzle to solve. It is a reality to engage with. A reality filled with contradictions, complexities, mysteries, questions, connections. And perhaps the goal is not to eliminate those things. Perhaps the goal is to become comfortable living among them. Because wisdom is not knowing everything. Wisdom is understanding how much remains unknown. The older Morin became, the more he seemed to appreciate this truth. In a world obsessed with certainty, he embraced complexity. In a world obsessed with quick answers, he encouraged deeper questions. In a world obsessed with division, he searched for connections. And maybe that is one reason his ideas continue to resonate with so many people. Because modern life often feels fragmented. People feel disconnected from themselves. Disconnected from others. Disconnected from meaning. Disconnected from purpose. And Morin reminds us that these things cannot be understood separately. Everything is connected. Your emotional life is connected to your relationships. Your relationships are connected to your environment. Your environment is connected to society. Society is connected to culture. Culture is connected to history. History is connected to countless decisions made by countless people long before we arrived. When we begin seeing those connections, something changes. Life starts making a little more sense. Not because it becomes simple, but because we stop demanding simplicity from it. And perhaps that is one of the most mature perspectives a human being can develop. The ability to tolerate ambiguity. The ability to live without complete certainty. The ability to move forward even when every answer has not yet arrived. Because waiting for certainty often means waiting forever. Many people postpone their lives while waiting to feel ready. Waiting to feel confident. Waiting to feel sure. Waiting to know exactly what will happen. But life continues moving. And opportunities continue passing. And years continue unfolding. Morin would likely remind us that certainty is not the prerequisite for action. Action often comes first. Understanding follows later. Think about your own life. How many experiences only made sense after they happened? How many painful moments eventually revealed unexpected lessons? How many setbacks redirected you toward something better? How many endings became beginnings? At the time, none of those events felt clear. At the time, they felt confusing, messy, uncertain. Yet meaning emerged later. This is one reason why complexity should not frighten us. Because complexity does not mean chaos. It simply means reality contains more layers than we initially see. And those layers often reveal themselves slowly. One experience at a time. One insight at a time. One season of life at a time. Perhaps this is why Edgar Morin's work feels so relevant today. We live in a culture that constantly encourages certainty. Certainty in politics. Certainty in ideology. Certainty in identity. Certainty in opinions. Yet reality remains wonderfully resistant to certainty. Reality keeps reminding us that life is bigger than our categories. Bigger than our assumptions. Bigger than our predictions. And perhaps that is not something to fear. Perhaps it is something to appreciate. Because a world filled with mystery is also a world filled with possibility. A future that cannot be fully predicted is also a future that can surprise us. A life that cannot be completely controlled is also a life capable of unexpected beauty. Maybe the problem is not that life is complex. Maybe the problem is that nobody taught us complexity. Nobody taught us how to navigate uncertainty. Nobody taught us how to hold multiple truths at the same time. Nobody taught us how to embrace contradiction without feeling lost. Nobody taught us that confusion is sometimes part of wisdom. And that is why Edgar Morin's legacy matters. Because he spent his life teaching people how to think differently. Not what to think. How to think. How to see connections. How to ask better questions. How to resist oversimplification. How to embrace complexity without becoming overwhelmed by it. And perhaps that is one of the greatest gifts any thinker can leave behind. Not answers. Perspective. A new way of seeing. A new way of understanding. A new way of engaging with reality. Today, we honor Edgar Morin not only for what he taught, but for the questions he encouraged us to ask. Questions that remain just as important now as they were decades ago. Questions about humanity. Meaning. Knowledge. Connection. Responsibility. And what it means to live wisely in an increasingly complex world. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me. What is one lesson life taught you that nobody ever explained beforehand? What is something you wish you had understood earlier? Take a moment to read the comments as well. You may discover that many of us are learning the same lessons in different ways. And if this conversation resonated with you, subscribe to the Therapy Room. Here, we explore psychology, philosophy, emotional healing, human behavior, and the thinkers whose ideas continue shaping the way we understand ourselves and the world around us. Thank you for spending this time with me. And thank you, Edgar Morin, for reminding us that reality is complex. That uncertainty is inevitable. That understanding requires humility. And that life is far richer than simple answers can ever capture. Until next time. Take care of yourself.